Good evening, everyone. Lovely to start our shiurim again. Tonight's shiur is called Reincarnation and the Secret to a Name. We know that names are very important. A lot that we do is through the name, a person's name. You get a call up, we call you up by a name. Someone who's not well, you say a bracha, refuah shlema, through the name. A person passes away, lo anenu alechem, you make a hashkava, you use a name, you make a memorial prayer, you use a name. On the tombstone, the main thing of a tombstone to commemorate the person who passed away is the name. The most important thing is the name. Everything else, any description, everything else is just is extra. The main thing is to engrave the name. That is the custom. Because the name is important. Why is the name important? The Holy Arizal explains that when God created the world, He used the tool of speech, so to speak. Speech is a metaphor of a particular type of revelation that, just like we speak, we use the tool of speech to communicate. And speech is, on the one hand, as we discussed many times, revealing, but on the other hand, concealing. So too, we use our speech as a metaphor to understand how God created the world. On the one hand, God wanted to reveal and to bestow His goodness onto the world. So that's a form of revelation. But in order for there to be a physical world that has free choice, there had to be concealment. Like speech, speech reveals a little bit of what I'm feeling, a little bit of what I'm thinking, but not all, only a little bit of it. When a person is overwhelmed with emotion, you cannot speak. When a person has a rush of thought and is enveloped in that thought, he cannot speak either. So speech is limiting. So too the metaphor of speech, and God said, let there be light, etc., is a metaphor to show, and so to speak, how God created the world on the one hand. But yet on the other hand, we know through the letters, the actual letters of the Torah, creation came to be because the letters themselves are the vessels by which contain the divine light or the energy that animates the world. And therefore the Holy Arizal explains that the name of something is its divine energy that animates it, translated into the physical manifestation of a physical letter with a physical sound, a physical shape, etc. Something tangible, like a vessel. So a letter is like a vessel that contains a thought or a feeling or an emotion. It describes something. So too, a word of something in Hebrew, even, for example, a stone, that configuration of those letters energize or bring about the energy that creates that stone. Man is not dissimilar to that, and that is, although a name does not express my essence. A name is not my essence, The name is not my essence. My essence is my soul. But the name expresses my essence. It's a tool, it's like a kli, a vessel by which expresses my essence. And so therefore my name and your names are very important, because it is that tool by which I relate to outside of me, to the world outside of me, to the physical world that I live in. And that is the energy by which is expressed through my name, is related to my essence and expressed through my name. So the name is very, very important. So important, the concept of names, is that the whole book of exile and exodus is called Shemot, names. And the very beginning of the book of Shemot, of the book of exile, when the Jewish people entered the land of Egypt and eventually exited the land of Egypt, and there was redemption, both exile and redemption is very much related to names. The concept of name, that's why the whole book of Shemot is called names. Shemot. And how does it start? Ve'ele Shemot b'nei Yisrael habayim Mitzrayma. These are the names of the Jewish people that came into Egypt. And it lists the names, even though we know the names already from before. We know the people who came to Egypt. We know their names. Why does it list it again? Because the name is a very powerful tool. Specifically when the Jewish people are now entering the land of Egypt, the land of their exile, and eventually will exit the land of their exile, names have a very important lesson and a role to play. And that is that we have a halachic concept that, for example, in halakha, if you forget something, if you forget crop or something like that, and you're harvesting a field, you have to leave it to the poor. It's called shikaha. When you forget something, it belongs to the poor, and the poor knows that you've harvested. He knows if he's seen you harvested, you forgot some sheaves, or you forgot to take some fruit from a tree. He has permission to come into your field according to the Torah and partake of that. That's his portion in your land that God had given him. If there is a tree that is known by a specific name, like the green tree, if it has a specific name, it's never considered forgotten in halakha. And therefore a person, if the poor person knows that this particular tree is a favored tree because it has a name, then it's not ever considered forgotten. He cannot partake of it. Similarly, there's a halakha that we know that 1 in 60, an item that is not kosher, that is mixed with 60 times its amount, is batel according to halakha. But davar shebeminyan, something that is sold or is used or is bought and sold through a number, for example, eggs, you buy 1 egg, 2 eggs, 6 eggs, half a dozen, or a dozen, lo batel. It's not nullified. It's never nullified because each one is a separate entity for themselves. When the Jewish people were counted, they weren't counted as a number. They were counted with a name because each individual was important and thus is never nullified. No matter where a Jew will go, no matter where a Jew will find themselves in the most difficult situations, in the most darkest places in the world, spiritually, can never be nullified, can never be forgotten, because he has a name, so to speak. And that name makes him not be forgotten, so to speak. And that is a very important lesson to be learned, that when the Jewish people went into Egypt, they were counted, they were enumerated. It doesn't say there were just 70 souls that went down to Egypt. It lists their name. And they are numbered by name. Therefore, the fact that they were numbered by name, and in fact, when the Jewish people were again counted by Moshe Rabbeinu, they had to state their name. Who are they? Which tribe they're from? And who's their father? Because the name has an importance, and that importance is so great that it ensures a person will never be forgotten, will never forget, so to speak, who he is. Because the name expresses a part of his very identity and his soul. So a name that we use is not just a description. For example, Ephraim, that I need to use a name just to communicate with Ephraim, to call his attention. It's deeper than that. And how do we see that it's deeper than that? And we know that when a person faints, one of the ways to arouse them is by calling their name. Calling their name in their ear is a way to arouse their essence, their core, bring them, so to speak, back to life. Bring them back to consciousness. So again, we see the importance of name. Therefore, when the Jewish people entered Egypt, they were numbered by name. The Almighty enumerated them by name, showing that because Hashem considers them and counts them by name, it's even if they go into a spiritual slumber, into exile, their name, so to speak, will save them. In other words, they will easily be able to be re-aroused or awakened from their spiritual slumber, from their exile, and will always merit redemption and exodus. And that's why the whole book of Shemot, the book of exile, the Jewish people entering a very bitter time in their history, a very dark period in their history, where the Jewish people almost could have been, God forbid, forgotten, or so intermingled amongst the Egyptian culture that they could have, God forbid, totally lost any remnants, any connection to their Jewish core. Not the case. And that's why God specifically, before they even entered Egypt, He enumerated them by name, because that name is able to, so to speak, that energy or the power of that name or the letters and what they represent, the spiritual and divine energy behind that name, that is connected to the very essence of their soul, because the essence of the soul is never adulterated. is always pure and always remains with God, and therefore can always be re-aroused and can never be defiled or adulterated. And that's the power of the name. There's a very interesting custom, and therefore as well, when the Jewish people were able to leave Egypt because of the merit of their name, because they entered with the power of the name. When they have a name, you never become nullified. You're never forgotten. Your core, your essence will never be forgotten. There's a very interesting custom. Some of you may be aware of this. At the end of the Amidah, we say a verse that the verse's first letter and last letter of that verse is the first and last letter of your name. For example, my verse, my name is Michael, so my verse is Ma Tovu Ohalecha Yaakov Mishkenotecha Yisrael. The first letter of that pasuk, of that verse, is Mem, for my name Michael. The last letter, Yisrael, Lamed, is Michael, the Lamed of my name. And the reason why we say this verse at the end of the Amidah, it says that because when a person passes away after 120 years, he could be so overwhelmed by what's going on that he can forget your name. What kind of custom is this? Who needs to remember a name? You need to know a name. What do you need to know your name for? And what the angels that escort you to the world to come and the divine tribunal don't know who you are, don't know your name. You no longer have a body. Your soul. It's a world of truth. There's nothing hidden in the world of truth up above. What do you need a name for? And it says that maybe you'll forget your name. And therefore you need something to, every single day, a sgula, a very special omen, to be able to help you that in the time of need, after 120 years, that God forbid you will not be so overwhelmed and scared at the time of your preparation, of a person's preparation to come before the divine tribunal, that you need an omen to remember your name. What do you need your name to remember your name for? The reason is because our name is the vessels and the tool by which we expand godliness in this world. They are the channels. And when that person, the Arvei Nachal explains, when a person conducts himself in the way of righteousness, he expands those channels. Our whole objective in this world is to do what? Is to reveal godliness into the world. Not to further contract godliness and conceal godliness and cause godliness to be hidden in the world. The objective of this world is, as it says in Midrash, Nitava Kadosh Baruch Hu liot lo dira b'tachtonim. The Almighty desired that there should be a dwelling place down below. Meaning to say that godliness will be revealed in this world. Our objective is to reveal godliness in the world. And our name is the channel or the pipes by which we reveal. One of the pipes by which we reveal godliness in the world. And when we act in a righteous way, we expand those pipes, those channels. And thus we expand and cause more godliness to be revealed in the world. If God forbid we do not conduct ourselves in a manner of righteousness, and we sin, God forbid, then we contract those vessels or those channels, and thus contract godliness in the world, cause less godliness to be revealed in the world, which is the exact opposite of our objective. Therefore, when a person after 120 years passes away, and if he did not conduct himself in the way that is befitting of the purpose of his creation, to fulfill the purpose of his creation, he's contracted his name. He's minimized his name. And thus could cause forgetfulness. Forget his name, meaning to say, forget your name, meaning to say that you have diminished the channels by which it was necessary for you to reveal godliness in the world. That's what it means that you'll forget your name. And thus a person has to go through a cleansing process, what's called hibut hakever, when the body dissolves, etc. It's a part of the process of tikkun, of rectification of the body, when a person was too attached and attracted to the materialism of the world, made him contract the vessels or the channels or the pipes of godliness, the conduits of godliness, i.e. his name. And thus a person will be required to go through this process of cleansing or purging the body that defiled the body, and thus the other vessel, the more spiritual vessel. The body itself is a vessel, but the name is also a vessel. It's a higher vessel. My body has a name. My soul in a body has a name. So the body itself is a physical vessel for the nefesh, for the spirit, for the soul. My name is more of a spiritual vessel of my soul. And they are connected. Thus, if a person, through the bodily functions of the world, the materialism of the world, caused a contraction of spirituality or revelation that was necessary for him or her to reveal in the world, he contracted his channels, he contracted his vessels, thus he's diminished his name, so to speak, or made his name totally forgotten, and his purpose, by which through his name, revelation of God will come down to this world, be forgotten. That's what it means, forgetting your name. Thus we strive every day to say a pasuk, and in the merit of this pasuk, in the merit of this verse, by bringing more Kedusha in the world, another verse in the world, and saying it every single day, with the hope that we will expand godliness in the world, through Torah and through the verses of Torah, and thus not forget our name, and thus not forget our purpose in this world. And this is very significant. And the reason why this is very significant is because last week we read the episode of Zimri ben Salu. Zimri ben Salu was a leader of the tribe, no less, a leader of the tribe of Shimon, not a small person by any stretch of the imagination, a very great person. Bilam suggested to Balak that there's no way, you remember the story that Balak commissioned Bilam to curse the Jewish people, and he wasn't able to curse the Jewish people. Everything that came out of his mouth was only a blessing, a prophecy of goodness, a prophecy foretold goodness and greatness for the Jewish people. But he did give him an advice. And he says that the Almighty despises immorality, immoral behavior. Through immorality, you'll be able to seduce an element of the Jewish people into idol worship. Because once there is free reign, then once you lose your control and your discipline, then you lose your control and discipline in other areas as well, and then it leads to idol worship. That's exactly what happened. The Midianites seduced the Jewish people, and culpable, though the tribe that was most culpable was from the tribe of Shimon. And from the tribe of Shimon, no less than the leader of the tribe of Shimon, Zimri ben Salu, brazenly engaged in an act of immorality in the eyes of all of the Jewish people, and caused the Hilul Hashem, a desecration of God's name. Publicly flaunting. No care whatsoever. What's going on? We're talking about a very great leader. How can this possibly be? What's going on? There are things, remember, I always say that there's always a story within a story. The Kabbalists teach us that there are multiple things going on. When we read the story of the Bible, there are multiple things going on the most base level, the body level, and higher level, spiritual levels, things that are going on here, that are hidden in the verses. And that's what the great sages of Israel and the great Kabbalists teach us. And here would be another one of those beautiful classic examples. Let's see what's going on. First of all, twice that episode is mentioned. That episode is mentioned at the end of Parashat Balak, but it doesn't say any names. It just says that a person sinned brazenly, openly, etc., and doesn't mention his name or the name of the princess by which he sinned with. Doesn't say her name either. In Parashah of Pinhas, where it says Pinhas went after he killed them both, because they desecrated God's name publicly and flaunted it publicly, then it says their names. The question is, why does it say before it doesn't use a name, and afterwards it uses a name? And what is this Zimri ben Salu, a great person? What's he doing? What's going on here? There are many explanations. sometimes things happen subconsciously. Not sometimes, a lot of times. There's a beautiful Kabbalistic exposition about pleasures and desires. Why do we desire something? Why do we desire food or physical things? The simple answer is because we're physical entities. But why is it such a strong drive towards it? What do we need? We need food. We are much higher than food or drink or these type of things. And he explains, because the soul desires it as well. Because in everything there's embedded a spark, a spiritual spark. The soul wants it, but the soul wants it for spiritual purposes. The body wants it for bodily pleasures, but the soul wants it because it sees the divine spark behind it, and it wants it and it desires it. And therefore there are two components that want this physical thing, this beer. The body wants it because it has a long day, wants to kick off its shoes, and it's hot outside, and it just had a nice steak, and it wants to have a beautiful, end the meal with a beautiful beer. The soul says, wow, that beer is rooted in very high levels. It's got a divine spark. I want that spark. The only way I can release that spark is if I make a bracha, and that it's kosher, and that I have some spiritual intent behind it, that I'm quenching a thirst, and the energy I'm deriving from this food or drink will help me live and survive and thus serve Hashem. And thus I can elevate these sparks that exist in everything that I interact with. The soul desires it too. So too, a lot of the episodes that happen in the Bible, there are many stories going on multiple layers here. Zimri ben Salu desired this princess not simply for the bodily side, because we know from the Midianite, who came out from the Midianim, who came out? Ruth, from the Moabiyah, from the Midianites and the Moabim. Ruth.
Moshe's wife.
Sorry?
Moshe's wife.
Moshe's wife. Yes.
Yeah, but that was before Matan Torah. That was before the giving of the Torah, and she converted. But still, nonetheless, this was just an act without preparation, without conversion, without any of these things. So what's going on here? He desired that Mashiach will come through him. The same thing with David HaMelech, with Bathsheba. Shlomo HaMelech came from her. He knew that Mashiach is going to come through. He desired that. The timing wasn't right. He was chastised for that, etc., etc. But who came from him? Shlomo HaMelech came from this relationship. So obviously, we're not talking about, a small person. David HaMelech is. But we're not going to speak about David HaMelech because we'll get sidetracked. But the point is, the soul desires something, is attracted to something that is very powerful, very spiritual as well. So Zimri ben Salu was attracted to that as well. But I'm not going to focus on that too much. I'm more going to focus on another dimension. You remember the story of Shimon, Dinah, the sister of Shimon, that was taken captive by Hamor, the son of Shechem, and he raped her, and he wanted her as a wife, and he raped her. Shimon and Levi came, and they saved her. And Shimon, it was before the giving of the Torah, in order to save her from embarrassment and shame, he married her. He took her as a wife. Even though it was before Matan, even though she was his sister, but because it was before the giving of the Torah, and he had reason to, and that is to save her from shame, he took her as a wife. Remember that Shimon, predominantly Shimon, Levi also, but predominantly Shimon, he was the instigator. They went in, and because what they did, they raped, and their intention was to destroy the Jewish nation, because they said, because they came with a ruse, with the guys, and that is that they said, you want our sister, you want to marry our sister, you want us to marry your daughters, and our daughters marry your daughters, no problem, we have to have circumcision. We cannot marry with people of circumcision. So they went circumcised. What ended up happening was, on the third day, when it's most painful, the more weak, they came in and they killed it. 24,000. 24,000. Yaakov Avinu was very upset with them. And he chastised them. And he said like this, Yaakov says, Arur, apam, cursed is their anger. Kiaz. It's too overpowering, it's too overwhelming. Their strength and their power is too much. The last letter of every one of those words, Arur, apam, kiaz, is Zimri. Spells Zimri. Zimri was from the tribe of Shimon. Already Yaakov Avinu is hinting that there will be some rectification that has to be rectified here. There has to be a tikkun. There's going to be a reincarnation here. What's the whole concept of reincarnation? Predominantly, reincarnation is to fix something that was not right. If he's totally L'Shem Shamayim, for the sake of heaven, because they did the wrong thing and ultimately they wanted to finish off the Jewish people. Their intentions was to finish off the Jewish people. He said, let us intermarry, everything will be ours anyway. We'll outnumber them, intermarry with us, everything will be ours, we'll inherit everything, we'll finish off the Jewish people. We'll kill two birds with one stone. On the one hand, my son wants to marry Dinah. On the other hand, we'll allow them to intermarry with us, they'll let them intermarry with them. They are, who are they? They're a small tribe. We're a nation. We'll finish them off. So their intentions was to finish off. So Shimon knew this. Finish them off. But that has to be verified. That has to be, you have to know whether you are the one fitting to be able to do that. So what ended up happening is, the Midrash says a very interesting thing. On the one hand, Rashi says that to a slight degree, Dinah brought this upon herself, because it says that she wanted to see what's going on. In those days, I remember Uri Shemesh alav shalom, and as well in Morocco as well. Uri Shemesh came from Iraq. Told me that if you had a daughter, when a person had a daughter, they're very afraid. Why? Because the environment by which they were brought up was dangerous. Unfortunately, a daughter could be raped very easily. That was the scare. My mother told me as well that she was chased at least once or twice in Morocco, and some lady saved her and shooed away, the assailant. It was dangerous. In those days, it was dangerous, and therefore you have to be careful. You go escorted. Dinah went out. She wanted to sightsee. She was caught, and he raped her. She was very beautiful, and he raped her. And he so wanted her for a wife that he didn't let her go. But the Midrash says a very interesting thing, Midrash Rabbah. He says that Shimon Levi actually had to pull her away by force, almost take her away by force. It's almost like after he raped her, it's almost like she just resigned to the fact she's never going to get married to anybody, and maybe she should just stay there. That had to be rectified. And thus, because of those two sins on her level that were considered sins, she had a certain dimension of her soul had to be reincarnated. It was reincarnated in in Kozbi Batsur, the lady by which Shimon was immoral with. I don't want to spend too much time showing all of the proofs that the Kabbalists show from the different verses that Dinah was reincarnated. There are many, and we won't have time, and I want to really go on to the next topic, the next set of reincarnation. But Dinah was reincarnated in Kozbi Batsur, this particular lady of Midian, and Shimon was reincarnated in Zimri ben Salu. As Yaakov already hinted in the verse, Arur apam ki'az, the end letter, Resh, Mem, Yud, and Zayin spells Zimri. Now, what happened? All right, so he was reincarnated in Zimri. Why? Because he will stand in a test. If he stands the test of immorality, then the killing of Shechem and all of the 24,000 people is justified. Because then he's true to his word, so to speak. True to someone who stands up for morality. You know, it's all good and fine to stand up for morality when someone else is doing something wrong. Whoa, how dare they? But we have to stand up, have that same level when we judge ourselves as well. And that's very important. Very easy to be moral and take the moral high ground on someone else's expense. First, you got to do the high moral ground for yourself. You have to be tested. Shimon, before he did what he did, he wasn't tested yet. You're going to be tested. And you're going to be tested by being reincarnated, as Yaakov Avinu already hinted, in Zimri ben Salu, from the prince of the tribe of Shimon. To who? To Cosbi, which she had a spark or a dimension of Dinah that was reincarnated. It's very interesting to note that it says in the Pasuk that Hamor, the son of Shechem, it says, Vayar Ota. He saw her. He saw her. Who did he see? He saw Dinah, but it doesn't say Dinah. It says, Vayar Ota. He saw her. Why her? Say Dinah. He saw Dinah. Vayar Ota. He saw her. He saw her. Ota is a numerical value of 406. Zimri ben Salu is a numerical value of 406. He saw her. Zimri ben Salu saw her, means to say he saw the reincarnation of Dinah. He recognized her, so to speak, from a spiritual component. Whether he did consciously or not, I don't know. But subconsciously, definitely. And there were many things pushing him to this. To see whether he'll be able to rectify, justify the killing of those 24,000. He failed. And because he failed, guess what happened? Because he was the head of tribe, many members of his tribe also failed. 24,000. You look in the Torah tells you how many fell. How many fell? 24,000. The exact number. In Shechem. A rectification of that sin. But it goes further than that. And it works like this. There's a great Kabbalist by the name of Rabbi Menachem Azaria Mifano. He was an Italian scholar. He was a great Kabbalist. He lived at the same time of the Arizal. He was born around 1530 something, 37, something like that. Around the same time as the Holy Arizal. He was a student of the famed Kabbalist Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, who was buried in Tzfat. Moshe Cordovero, with that name, obviously hails from Europe. So this Rabbi Menachem Azaria Mifano was a disciple of him. He was a great Kabbalist. He wrote a book, amongst the many books that he wrote, called Sefer HaGilgulim, the book of reincarnations. And he shows how in the different people, personages in the Bible were reincarnated, and he proves and he shows how. And he says over here, you know what happened here? The end rectification of all of this episode, you know what had happened? In reincarnation of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva. Zimri ben Salu was reincarnated in Rabbi Akiva. First of all, we have to analyze. Rabbi Akiva ben Yosef, his name was. How do we spell Akiva? Anybody knows? Ayin, Kuf, Yud. The usual way is Bet, Aleph. But that's only in the Babylonian Talmud, of which in the Babylonian Talmud, the particular type of Aramaic that is spoken, you spell words with an Aleph at the end, as opposed to Hebrew with a Hey. In the Jerusalem Talmud, Akiva is spelled with a Hey. Ayin, Kuf, Yud, Bet, Hey. In Jerusalem Talmud. And of course, where did Rabbi Akiva live? He lived in Israel. He was in the time of the Mishnah, before the Babylonian Talmud. Furthermore, in Seder HaDorot, a historical work, he writes, where he goes from Adam and speaks about the history, he writes Akiva with a hey. So too in a book called the Kutei Torah Tehillim, on Tehillim, also spells Akiva with a hey. This has halachic significance because how do you write it in a Ketubah and how do you write it in a get? So there's a great halachic authority by the name of Rabbi Yitzhak Mivina from Wien, which was a great scholar of hundreds of years ago. And he was unsure, how is he going to spell in his Bedin the name Akiva, with a hey or with a aleph, according to the Jerusalemite Talmud, or according to the Babylonian Talmud. And he was shown in a dream a pasuk, a verse. Remember we spoke about the verse, that when you say a verse, and he was shown a verse. Or zarua latzadik, light is sown to the righteous. Uli yishrei lev simcha, and to the upright of heart, joy. The last letter of each one of those verses spell Akiva with a hey. Uli yishrei lev simcha. Simcha is a hey, not a aleph. And from then on, he always spelled Akiva with a hey. The truth is, both names in both spellings have great significance. Rabbi Yitzhak Mivina gave a credence and preeminence to the spelling of with a hey, but each one has a significance which is now not the time to explain. Zimri ben Salu, the numerical value of Zimri ben Salu, the one that sinned from the tribe of Shimon, that Rabbi Menachem Mefano says was reincarnated in Rabbi Akiva, is a numerical value of 406. Akiva ben Yosef, which was the name of Rabbi Akiva, is 395, plus the 11 letters of his name, because remember we said the letters, the very letters of the name complete and complement the name. Zimri ben Salu was missing the letters of his name in one part of the Torah. Why was he missing the name in one part of the Torah, and the second part of the Torah it says his name? The reason is because he hasn't been killed yet by Pinchas. Only after he was killed and was then interned, then the process of rectification and tikkun begins, and then some level of his name was restored, not fully, because he didn't come to a full tikkun, to a full rectification yet. So in one part his name was mentioned at all. The letters of his name were wiped off. Why? Because we said before, if a person sins, his name is forgotten. Like it says, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. The remembrance of a righteous person is for a blessing. What does it say in regards to Rasha? Shem Reshaim Yirkav. Let the name of the wicked rot. The name of the wicked. Imach Shimo v'zichro. You ever heard the term? Imach Shimo v'zichro. May his memory, may his name and his memory be blotted out. By the way, in regards to name, so this does not have, it doesn't really, it has application here, but the Holy Arizal explains in regards to God's name, the name Shmo, we say, and Vaya bayom ahu, and on that day, the day when Mashiach will come, Ya Shem Echad Ushmo Echad. God will be one and his name will be one. And I don't want to spend too much time on this, but what does it mean? His name is one, he will be one and his name is one. His name, says Arizal, is the same numerical value as Ratzon. Ratzon, according to the Kabbalists, is the highest revelation. Those who remember the 10 emanations, Chokhmah, Binah, Vedat, etc., the 10 emanations, Keter is the highest one. Keter is the crown, or the emanations. The highest one is Keter, which is synonymous with Ratzon, a person's will. Or God's will is his name. In other words, God's name reflects his will. The creative power to create. God willed the world, and he created it through his name. Again, the name of God is very powerful and important, but we don't have the time to explain that. We've explained it on different shurim. How everything is rooted in the tetragrammaton name. Everything, all powers of creation is in the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey. The name that Arizal says, Shemo in Hebrew, his name is the same numerical value as Ratzon, which represents his very essence. It It's an expression of who you are, what you need to do, what you want to do. When Zimri ben Salu first sinned, his name wasn't mentioned at all. Remember we mentioned it? We asked. Only after he began the tikkun, when Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen killed Zimri ben Salu, then and only then is his name mentioned. Because the rectification process began. So you take Akiva ben Yosef, it's 395. How many letters? There are 11 letters. Altogether, 406. So Akiva ben Yosef is the same numerical value as Zimri ben Salu, says Rabbi Menachem Ifano. He reincarnated in Rabbi Akiva to bring him to his final revelation. How do we see this? We see 4 interesting things amongst the trillion of interesting things about Rabbi Akiva. He was a trooper. We love Rabbi Akiva. He's buried in Tveria, by the way. You go to Rabbi Akiva, I don't know about you, but when I go to Rabbi Akiva, I have a very exciting feeling, specifically when I go to Rabbi Akiva. I don't know why, but that's how it is. So Rabbi Akiva, 4 very interesting things. One is Rabbi Akiva taught Torah with self-sacrifice, absolute dedication in time of exile. In time of when the Romans were persecuting the Jewish people. Remember, Rabbi Akiva left home. He left home for 24 years. Who leaves home? Why? In order to establish students. He established 24,000 students. They all died. 24,000. They were reincarnation of the 24,000 of the tribe of Shimon that sinned. And he's the head of their tribe. Why did they die? Why did they die? They didn't honor one the other. For that you die? Lo nahagu kavod ze bazeh? You die because you don't show honor? I don't see people don't show honor all the time, and I don't see them dying like flies. Of course, we know that they were to be the leaders of the Jewish people, and if you don't know how to be tolerant, then how can you lead, etc. But something deeper here. And we discussed it, I think, on the shiur of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, another dimension. Lo nahagu kavod ze bazeh, because consciously or subconsciously, they knew who they were. They're the reincarnation of the 24,000 who sinned. How can I show you honor? How can you show me honor? We are nothing. We need to be rectified. We all sinned. They couldn't show honor one to the other because they knew who they were. Again, I don't know whether it was consciously, definitely subconsciously. It's another story being told here. What compelled them not to honor one another? What's their problem? Don't they remember the teaching of Rabbi Akiva that said, "V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha," love your fellow like yourself? The cardinal teaching of Rabbi Akiva, the very first teaching of Rabbi Akiva, they failed because they were from the reincarnation of those that sinned. That's why they didn't show honor one to the other. And they needed again to go through that process of death again, because we know the process of death ultimately is rectifies the soul. Number 3, interesting thing about Rabbi Akiva. He died on Kiddush Hashem. He was from the 10 who was killed because the king said that, Yosef, brothers, they sold Yosef. There were 10 brothers. Benjamin wasn't born yet. Yosef was the 11th. 10 of them sold. The king said, what's the law when you kidnap someone and you sell them? Hayav mitah, you come over the death penalty. I'm going to take the 10 leaders and I'm going to kill them. So the Kohen said, give me 3 days to ponder to see whether this is decreed from heaven, and if it is, we accept it. And he said it was decreed from heaven, and they were all reincarnation of the 10 brothers of Joseph. It doesn't say who was who, but I can give you a guess from according to Rabbi Menachem Ifano, which brother was Rabbi Akiva? Shimon. He gave his life. While reciting Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, he gave his life. Kiddush Hashem, for the sanctifications of God's name. Why? To rectify, ultimately the end rectification of Zimri ben Salu, who desecrated publicly God's name. Rabbi Akiva sanctified God's name publicly. Interesting. I want to share with you the fourth interesting thing. Rabbi Menachem Ifano says that Kozbi Batsur, this princess of Midian, that sinned with Zimri ben Salu, she was reincarnated in the wife of Turnus Rufus. Turnus Rufus. Interesting to note that Kozbi bat Nesi Midian Ahotam Hamuka, the verse that describes her, Kozbi, the daughter of the prince of Midian, the sister who was struck, is the numerical value of 1,386, which is, which is exact numerical value of Eshet Turnus Rufus, the wife of Turnus Rufus, with the two words Eshet Turnus Rufus. Those two words, 1384 plus the two words themselves, 1386. She was reincarnated to rectify the original reincarnation from Dinah in Eshet Turnus Rufus. Who's this Turnus Rufus? Turnus Rufus was a governor or a prince, and he always would come and annoy and challenge Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva always got the better of him. He always would ask him questions and debate him and try to show him how the Torah is not true and this and that and there is no God and and who are the Jewish people, what are they? And Rabbi Akiva always got the better of him. One time he comes home all upset and his wife asks him, "Why are you so upset?" And he says, "Again Rabbi Akiva beat me." I thought of this unbelievable question and this statement and Rabbi Akiva again got the better of me. He always snuffs me. She says, "I give you one advice. The God of Israel hates immorality. If you give me permission, I'll seduce him. And I'll seduce him and will publicly shame him." That big scholar of Israel. "I'll seduce him and will publicly shame him." Who was he? He was a reincarnation of Zimri ben Salu from the tribe of Shimon. Who was she? She was a reincarnation of Kozbi Batsur. How it comes together. And we see it in the numerics as well. And there's other proofs as well, which I just simply don't have the time. So she came to try and seduce him. So the Gemara says a very interesting thing in Avodah Zarah, in Masechet Avodah Zarah, page 20. And when she came, he did three things. He spat, he cried, and he laughed. She was shocked. First of all, he totally dismissed her advances. He just spat at her, spat on the floor in front of her. Like, in other words, she was so disgusted by the very idea, the very thought. Oh, he spat, he cried, and he laughed. So she asked him, why did you spit? What's the meaning of it? Why did you cry? Why did you laugh? And he said, "I can only answer you two of them. The third one you will know in time." And he said, "I spat because of the disgusting intention that you had of immorality. I was disgusted by it. And that's why I spat." Who are we and what are we? We come from nothing and we end up in nothing. "I cried because you will rot in the earth. And the only way to be able to rectify your sin is to rot in the earth. Because ultimately, death returns to the dust as it was to the earth. All the components of the body that sin, we know that big tzaddikim, their body doesn't decompose. And there's many such stories that are witnessed in history. So, ultimately, the purpose of the body decomposing is to nullification. Nullification of the body that was tempted in the physical materialism of the world. That's part and parcel of the process of purification of tikkun. He said, "I'm crying I'm crying because that is the only way that you will find tikkun. But what he also meant was the killing of Zimri ben Salu. He cried because of her burial then, and Dinah, and all of those that needed to go through the process of suffering of the grave. Because remember, the diminishing of the name happens and occurs when a person doesn't act properly. And she was very shocked, first of all, taken by his holiness, and that he really was the real deal, and she wasn't able to seduce him. And she said, is there any tikkun for me? She felt bad, and is there any tikkun for me? Is there any rectification for me? He said, yes, tshuva, repentance. She repented, she converted, and eventually she married Rabbi Akiva. That's what the Gemara says. The Gemara says this. Rabbi Menachem Efano says, of course he's going to marry her. Of course she's going to marry him. Because that will be the ultimate tikkun, the rectification of what happened with the whole story, with the whole episode. He was able to overcome her advances and her seduction, which Zimri ben Salu, his first reincarnate, wasn't able to do. And he rectified them all. And that was the reason why Rabbi Yitzhak Mifano says, and why the Gemara says, he laughed. That was the third reason he didn't want to tell her, because it was premature. She had to go and do tshuva. She had to go and repent and convert on her own steam. He wasn't going to tell her. That's why he laughed, because he saw in advance. And that is how everything came together, where we see the concept of a name, where Zimri ben Salu, first of all, in the first time of the Torah, is not mentioned by name. Second time, he is mentioned by name. And how it all comes together, the importance of the name, and rectifying the name, Rabbi Akiva ben Yosef, that has the same numerics as the name, he rectified the name. And he rectified that whole episode, starting from Dinah already, where Shimon killed 20,000, 24,000, and from his own tribe came 24,000 was killed. And then Rabbi Akiva established 24,000 students, and those 24,000 students also died. Until when? When was the rectification? Until Rabbi Akiva rectified the sin of Zimri ben Salu, the reincarnate of Eshet Tornus Rufus, the wife of Tornus Rufus, which is the same numerical value of Kosvi Bat Nasim Midyana Hotama Muka. Amazing. There are a lot of more very, very detailed things that enhance this and prove it even more, but it was just impossible to have the time.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming, everyone. By the grace of God, we'll see you next week.